it was a three-way conversation at that point. And yeah, I think kindness is an overlooked virtue. And there's two aspects to kindness. And typically when we think, and so I'm going to talk about the most overlooked aspect of kindness. Typically when we think of kindness, we think of it as something that we do for someone else. And the part of kindness that I'm currently most interested in is kindness towards ourselves. I think kindness towards others, I think actually in some ways it is getting like good press in terms of kindness and compassion and teaching kids how to be kind to others. But there's a growing movement now in something called self-compassion. And the interesting thing about self-compassion is that there was a movement, particularly in California, for self-esteem. And self-esteem is not all we thought it was cracked up to be. Often kids with high self-esteem are very entitled, but also very fragile. And self-esteem is really based on the ideas of success and failure, and on the, me comparing myself to you. So I feel good if I make more free throws than you do, but if I make less, I don't feel so great. And when you feel like you failed, or that you don't compare, that you're worse than or less than someone else, self-esteem kind of leaves us high and dry. And that's where self-compassion really has a benefit, because self-compassion is based on the idea that, wow, in this moment, I'm having a really rough time. So first you need to be aware that you're having a really rough time. The second component, so that's mindfulness, being aware that you're having a rough time. The second component of self-compassion is understanding that as human beings, having a rough time is just part of the game. We all have a rough time sometimes. And so knowing that this is part of being human, part of the human condition. And then the third part is, once you realize that you're having a rough time and you remember that it's part of the human condition, then you can choose to offer yourself kindness. And actually, I'm thinking of the moment last night, and I might blur like what I said to you all yesterday and what I said last night to the parents and teachers. And so if I make a reference and you're all going like this, I'll back up and start over. But we were talking about what qualities would we ideally want as parents, teachers, grandparents, to offer our children in whatever setting we happen to be in. And people said kindness, compassion, presence, patience, fun. And I said, okay, now can you offer those things to yourself? And someone very sweetly raised their hand and said, like, it takes too much time. And I said, well, maybe, but maybe not. So everybody just take one hand and put it on your heart. And notice what happens to your body when you do that with the sense of touch. So what happens, just for anybody? What happened? Comforting. Yeah, what else? Warm. For me, there's this sense of softening. Like, that doesn't take any time. You can be having a crazy moment, like, you're in your classroom. It's a little chaotic. You're thinking, things are going south. And before you do anything else, you can just do this. For just a minute. No one needs to know. Or you can teach it to your kids. And the whole room can do it. And it can even be like one of those silent classroom signals. Like if you go like this and then you wait and see how many kids will do it at the same time. And it doesn't need to be whatever, because some of you might be thinking, oh, my kids aren't going to do that. And that's too woo-woo for them. But it doesn't need to be a big deal. And touch in our cultures so missing. And it has, for the most part, it has that calming effect. So, so the last part of self-compassion is offering yourself kindness. And it can be something simple. You can say, you know, I know you're having a rough time right now, and you're doing your best. I know you're doing your best. And it shifts the whole moment. So there's, and then I think, to me, when we practice kindness towards others, it enhances our ability to be kind and compassionate towards ourselves. When we practice kindness and compassion towards ourselves, it enhances our ability to be kind and compassionate to others. Because if I remember for myself, being human is tough. Like, it's a tough job. It's a tough gig, being human. And if I remember that, then if I see someone struggling, if I see someone acting out, if I see someone making questionable choice, it's like I can remember that those behaviors come out of the suffering of being human. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to put a stop to a particular behavior, but it's not going to have that edge that can like be a secondary trauma. It's like, being human's tough. I understand you're behaving this way because you're suffering. I'm not going to let you, you know, berate the kid sitting next to you or bully the kid on the playground, but I'm not going to judge you and be harsh because you're being harsh, because that just perpetuate. I mean, you either you're perpetuating a cycle of kindness or you're perpetuating a cycle of harshness, and you get to choose.
You were talking about the touch is not there, and I noticed that I'm in a kind of like really low poverty school, and a lot of the kids want hugs, and they want that, they crave that attention, they crave that touch. So just, you know, being able to teach them to do this, or, you know, when they're feeling like they need something.
Right.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah. And can you see how, like, touch is, I mean, it's like the mirror neuron thing. It's a reset for our system. And so, I mean, I didn't say this yesterday, and so it may not be obvious, but I've worked in settings across the board, and my son happens to go to the most socioeconomically diverse high school in the country. So on one side is Silicon Valley, .com, crazy affluence, which has its own types of stress about getting into a good school, and, you know, and one of the women last night was talking about, like, kind of the sports parenting insanity, and that community has all of that. Literally across the tracks is East Palo Alto and East Menlo Park, and I don't know what the current stats are, but 2 or 3 years ago, East Palo Alto had the highest per capita murder rate in the country. So, and you've got all these kids in one school. No big deal, you're totally fine. And I was working with the kids in the remedial English class. So these are the kids who were in remedial English in 9th grade, and we're still in remedial English in 10th grade. And for some reason in California, after 10th grade, we have no remedial English. So that means 10th grade is make or break. Either you get your act together with your English or you don't. And most of these kids come from very low income, very traumatized families. So I've worked the whole spectrum. And so for those of you who are in low income schools and you're thinking, nah, this is fine for like the ritzy private school, my experience and actually the data from my colleagues is in the really hard Scrabble low income schools, this actually may be more impactful because they don't have those other supports. You know, there's stresses that come with affluence, but there's supports. And so the data from those low income settings that is coming in is like, it makes a huge difference. Because just, you know, a lot of these kids where I am, you know, they live in a tiny apartment with 12 people. There's no quiet. So just a few minutes of quiet makes a difference. Learning that you can respond rather than react makes huge difference. And so, you know, we'll see what the data keeps saying, but so far in those settings, it's been probably more powerful than in the affluent settings, and there's still good data for the affluence. Right, and a lot of those kids, I mean, at least the kids I've worked with, and you can tell me if I'm making assumptions here, but the kind of the ethos of where they live is like, you survive by being tough. Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting. I was telling, I don't even remember when it was, and it might not even have been while I was here, because I did a mindfulness thing also before I came here. But, you know, there's kids that sit in my classroom, and you just think, they're not with me. They're not listening. Like, he's taking a nap. You know, the guy in the back with his baseball cap and the hoodie, and it's down and his arms are crossed, and you're like, yeah, okay, you know, maybe a few kids in the class will get it, but he's not going to be one. At the end, I have them write a letter to a friend, and I'll pull out my book later because I don't remember the quotes off the top of my head, and I'll read you some. But like that guy in the back with his hoodie pulled down, the letter to a friend, which says, write a letter to a friend describing the still quiet place and how you use mindfulness in your daily life, blew me away. And I thought he was snoozing. Totally thought he was snoozing. So I'm going to say one more thing about that. When I teach, whether it's, you know, to a classroom of 4th graders or a classroom of low-income 10th graders or to you all, I consider it planting seeds. And not every seed sprouts, and not every seed sprouts in 8 weeks. And so I also want you, like, we have one more day together. I'd encourage all of you to, like, leave yesterday behind. Today's a new day. Leave your preconceptions, even those that came from yesterday, behind. Be here fully, and then take what works for you. And some of you are going to be like, no more mindfulness, ever. Thank you very much. Totally fine. Totally fine. Some of you are going to be like, yeah, well, that was nice for a couple days, and maybe. And others of you are going to be like, where can I learn to do this? I want to learn to do this. I want to learn it for myself. I want to take it back to my classroom. And all of that is fine. So, you know, wherever you are on that spectrum, like, relax into that and just, it's fine, totally fine. Okay, that was a long answer to one question. We talked a little bit about this at breakfast. So I'm going to back up a step. How many people actually know what executive function is and what it does for you? Okay, so I'm going to back up and define executive function just so that we're all on the same page. So executive function, and actually now the term is executive functions because it's multiple skills. And you can think of it as the task manager in your brain. And I'm pretty sure that in 5 years or in 10 years, we will have lost the diagnostic category of ADHD, or it's going to be completely wed to this idea of executive function, which in the science and in the medical literature now, it is very tied, but I think still in the day-to-day life, it's not so tied. But executive function means all these skills that get us through our day. So writing down your homework, putting the thing that you wrote your homework down into your backpack, putting the books that you need to take home into your backpack, going home and planning out, okay, I have math and I have English and I have history, and like planning out how am I going to do that. Actually planning out your English essay so that it's not just a sentence about this and a sentence about that and it's like all over the map and it doesn't have any flow. Putting all those things back in your backpack, taking the backpack to school, and last but not least, my daughter's personal favorite, turning the actual piece of paper into the teacher. That's part of executive function. Executive function also has to do with impulse control. It has to do with emotional regulation. Interestingly, and there's a chapter in my book, and you guys can thumb through it this afternoon. It was the hardest chapter for me to write because all of the rest of the book is just like mine and it comes out of me, and it was very simple. But this was taking all the research and data and making connections that I see that I haven't seen a lot of people make between mindfulness, executive function, and actually compassion and altruism. And so, because executive functions also part of it is perspective taking. I can't be compassionate with you if I can't take your perspective first. So there's a social emotional piece to executive function that I think also isn't as well known. But mindfulness has been shown to enhance executive function in both children and adults. And this was something that Kim told me that I don't have a lot of data for, but it doesn't surprise me. When you strengthen one part of executive function, it then starts to strengthen all the other parts. And so it is, you know, just like kind of ADHD is kind of a downward spiral of executive function. If you start to strengthen them, then it's an upward spiral. And mindfulness does strengthen the various components of executive function. So particularly important for people young and old with ADHD, but we all need our executive function every day. I mean, just think about and some of you in this room I know because you've shared with me either have ADHD or you have children with ADHD, but just think of all the tasks that had to be ordered in order for you to be sitting in this seat. You know, you still, I think, all like have your car keys and your cell phone and, you know, but all those tasks, that's executive function. And mindfulness does enhance executive function if they remember to do it. Okay. Yeah, and for kids who have ADHD, they tend to be 2 or 3 years behind in executive function. And I think I shared with you yesterday, my daughter had a really rough 8th grade year because the 8th grade year, totally understandably, is meant for getting the majority of kids ready to manage themselves in high school. But if you think about that, she really has the executive function of a 5th or 6th grader, and you're asking her to prepare for high school, there's a certain kind of insanity to that. And I totally understand that, you know, whatever it is, 80% of the kids are there and it's developmentally appropriate. But then when a school system, I'm not saying you here, treats those kids as, but there's this thing, it's like, you know, there's these things that we do as human beings that just have their own timetable. When a kid learns to walk, when a kid learns to talk, when a kid learns to read, when a kid loses their teeth. And to punish a kid who's lacking executive function for not having executive function is kind of like yelling at a kid who's like, you know, balancing on the coffee table to start walking. I mean, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so school systems need to learn to adapt to that.
I'm asking because I'm curious, certain read articles about boys in particular falling apart around middle school age, right? Like the later
Mm-hmm.
and maybe girls too.
I just think the girls are less well recognized.
I mean, I've just generally seen my son just
Right. Well, the thing is, elementary school is much looser in general. You have one teacher standing in front of the room at the end of the day saying, here's your homework. Here's what you need to do. You're in one room. You pack up all your stuff. You go home. Hopefully, you keep track of most of that stuff. You come back. The person says, turn in your papers. Everybody else turns in their papers. And then you forget, and your lovely fifth grade teacher, in my case for Nicole, says, Nicole, please hand me your paper, because everybody else has passed them in. And then, and junior high is not that. And that's fine for most kids, and then we have to support the other kids.
And the final question that we've got flows in from that, given that there are studies that show that mindfulness techniques can improve testing. And this person asked for a 1-minute practice other than intentional breathing. Is there anything other than the intentional breathing that you might recommend
For test taking.
For testing? And I'm not sure if you're aware, but North Carolina is, I would say, a relatively high-stakes testing state. I guess Indiana is whether it's public, private, charter, you could.
Okay.
And so this person particularly asked, they attended a seminar in deep design thinking and said that shaking the top of one's ear helps thinking. So never heard that one.
So Kimberly, do you just want to demonstrate what you were shown, and then I'm going to give you a different answer? But the thing that you were shown makes a lot of sense, and we can talk about why it makes a lot of sense. But why don't you show it? And Drew, do you want to make sure so come over here so Drew can get it on the.
We have an OT at school, and my daughter has tons of math anxiety, test anxiety, and this goes back to the OT piece, not the design thinking piece. But she was telling Isabella that when she enters an anxiety-producing situation, before she enters the math class, or she feels that she's anxious when she's in there and needs to de-anxious herself, to bend over, like try and touch her toes, and then shake her arms out, put her arms, on her hips, and left and right, and then kind of tug on her ear a little bit, and that would
So everybody
reset the brain.
stand up and do it. Okay, totally fine. Remove the tightness in your back. Refreshed.
I'm thinking if it's a teacher, for testing scenario, then that centers you.
Right.
In a good way.
So we were talking at breakfast, you can sit down now, about why would that sequence of movements be helpful? And I just learned them 30 minutes ago. But your head, your head's down, you're increasing blood flow to your head. The shaking is just kind of getting you back in your body. The twisting has the piece of crossing the midline. And I don't know about you, but on the one ear I rubbed, I can still feel it. And so it's pulling our attention in a little way that then allows us to be more focused on what we're doing next. Because if I'm paying attention to the sensations in my ears, I'm not probably also super busy thinking, I don't know this math concept and I'm not going to be able to pass the test and then I'm going to have to go to summer school. And like, if you're paying attention to rubbing your ears and you're paying attention to the sensation, you're not simultaneously probably having all those thoughts. So that's one practice. California is also a high stakes testing state, and I agree with you that there probably aren't any that aren't. Our state test until last year was called the STAR test. So I had lots of teachers ask me for a test prep practice, and the ideal test prep practice is I would be in the classroom for a period of time. I would have taught them this practice, several months ago, and I would come back on the testing day and we would do the practice again. But the STAR test is just a simple thing, and it's not really a breathing thing, but it's more of a mnemonic. So STAR is, if you're struggling, if you're nervous about the test, or you're struggling on a particular problem on a test, the S is for stop. Just stop. Like, you don't need to, get going and attack the test right away. take a breath, so there is a breath in there, that's T. A is accept or allow, so just accept, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. And not try to make, because like what most of us, children and grown-ups, do is we feel nervous, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, feel nervous, and then we try to pretend that we're not, or we try to push it down, or we try to make it go away. It's like, just accept that you feel a little nervous, and that like feeling nervous is okay, and you don't need to change it or fix it or do anything about it. You just feel a little nervous. And one kid, third grade boy, used the A as all's well, like even feeling nervous, it's all okay, all's well. And then R is for resume. Like once you've reset, you can resume. And you can do that as many times as you need to during a test. And probably the most important part is the A part, that all's well. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay not to know the answer to this particular problem. It's okay to not have any thoughts in this moment about how I'm going to respond to this writing prompt. It'll come if I don't get too tight around it.
The thing about this right here, I definitely would carry it back to my classroom. I have students who have behavior disorders, and I think for them, having that starts in the reflection course, think about accept, I am frustrated, I am upset, and then figure out how to get back on course. I think this is an excellent strategy skill.
Right, and you can't, I mean, it was designed for test taking, but it really does transfer across any challenge. That kid said something and I'm really mad. Same thing. And it's not like I'm pretending I'm not mad. I'm just, it's okay to be mad, and then it's that thing of, and we're going to talk, this morning's going to be about responding and reacting. Now I get to choose my behavior. I am angry. That's the feeling that's present. Now what's my choice? I am stuck on this math problem. Now what's my choice? Someone over there was going to say something. Not my parent thinks I'm anxious, right?
Like real anxiety, and so that just kind of seems like perfect timing.
Right.
I kind of feel like if I would have had a little bit of this in my toolbox, I could have helped them. You try to
Right.
say it's only those who will become, it'll come, but they can't. They just can't.
Right. And you've got 4 kids who are diagnosed, and because I see these kids in my office every day, I can tell you there's way more than 4 kids. And then you've got kids who are anxious but don't meet because there's very strict clinical definitions for that. The other thing for you all to know, and we'll probably come back to this, but maybe not, it depends how the day goes, is the data for mindfulness from long ago from the studies for adults shows that mindfulness decreases stress, depression, anxiety. It's been used for eating disorders, which are way more common in kids. We don't have any statistics yet on cutting. We do have statistics on drug use. But there's data on adults, but what's more important for all of you is that we're now starting to get the data on kids. There was just a study of 400 high schoolers in Belgium where mindfulness cut the rate of depression by half. I mean, it's not a medication. It's relatively cost effective. It can be delivered to a whole, I mean, my dream, I think I told you all yesterday about the high school. So this is the affluent high school, one town over, and we had, actually I think I said this in the parent talk, we had 6 kids within 5 months take their lives by standing in front of the train. And if you can cut the rates of depression and anxiety by half, I'm not saying that mindfulness would have saved all those kids, And now I'm going to shift gears and tell you a story. So with that in the background, I was teaching to a group of fourth graders, and we were talking about difficult moments. And the little boy said, "My cat bit me, and I wanted to hit him." And again, this was one of those moments where he wasn't just saying it sitting there calmly, like his hand was cocked. You could see that even, 4 days later, it was still really present for him. And I said, "Well, did you?" And he said, "No, but I almost did." And as a class, we dubbed that an almost moment, because there is that place. I'm really angry. I want to hit my cat. I want to punch the kid in the nose. And I have a choice. Now, if those high school kids who were having a serious attack of unkind mind had the awareness that my fourth grader had, then maybe when they said, "I wanted to stand in front of the train," then they would be here to have the conversation. "Well, did you?" "No, but I almost did." Mindfulness is being taught in prisons, and it's been shown to reduce the rate of recidivism. It's been being taught in juvenile justice institutions, and probably the most interesting is it's being very widely adopted in the military, pre and post deployment. So and the data from all of those settings keeps coming that it is making a difference in terms of, the broadest term again is suffering, but anxiety, stress, depression, and all those other things. And the whole reason I'm teaching to kids is, why does someone have to be either in 7th grade or 43 and be diagnosed before they get these skills? It just doesn't make any sense. Why not have every kid learn it when they're in 6 or 7 and then go through life with these skills? That makes much more sense to me. But in the high schools, the ideal way to do it, in any school, the ideal way to do it is to teach the kids, to teach the teachers, to teach the parents, to have a common language. And it is really pretty cost effective when you think of the costs of not addressing these issues. I'm smiling because I'm going to ask you to notice your response when I say what I'm going to say next. So we're going to sit for a few minutes, not the several hours that we did yesterday. So just notice already the thoughts like, yeah, I want to sit. That was way too much talking. Or, sitting again. I don't feel like it. So you can put your stuff down. And if you're willing, close your eyes. Settle your body however it feels good to you. Let all the talking kind of drift into the background. And bring your attention to the breath. And again, just notice the thoughts and feelings as we begin to sit. And whatever thinking is occurring, so they're not even really your thoughts, and whatever feelings are arising, just let them be. Nothing to change, nothing to fix. Everything's fine. As my 4th grade friend says, all is well. Even the irritation, even the sleepiness, even the physical, "Oh, now I really wish I brought my own chair." All fine. Just let it be there. And bring your attention to the breath. Feeling the breath from the inside out. Seeing if you can feel the entire cycle of the breath. Breathing in, stillness. Breathing out, stillness. Do your best to stay with the breath, and I'll give you a few little reminders. Resting the attention on the breath. Coming back to the breath. Seeing if you can really allow yourself to soften into this moment. Perhaps allowing both the breath and the mind to slow down. And with kindness and compassion, notice if you're resisting any part of your experience in this moment. Without judging yourself, without thinking it should be different. And particularly if you're in a part of the room where sound is prominent, see if you can let the sounds come and go, your thoughts come and go, your feelings come and go. Just like the breath. feeling the breath. And again, perhaps taking one moment to put a hand on your chest. And offering yourself some kindness. So perhaps you can simply say to yourself, may I be happy just as I am. May I be peaceful and at ease just as I am. May I experience love just as I am. And it's totally fine if it feels a little bit hokey. And it's also totally fine if it kind of rocks you to your core. So with your hand on your chest, feeling the breath rise and fall in your chest. So feeling that expansion and stillness and release and stillness. And when you're ready, in your own time, taking 3 slow, deep breaths and returning your attention to the room. So I'm going to read you a poem, and we'll go from there. So this is called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters, and it was mentioned in the article for last night's talk. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault, and it takes me forever to find my way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault, and it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. And I will tell you, at this point, almost all 4th graders sigh. Like, really? Again? There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. So depending on what age you teach, I'm going to ask you to put on, your 4th grade hat or your 10th grade hat. And we're going to have a short kind of student-based discussion about this, and then we'll have an adult-based discussion. So is the author of this poem, is she talking about a real street and a real hole? So I see some heads shaking. So what is she talking about? Life, choices, experience, relationships for sure. So, excellent question. Put on your students' hats for a minute. What's the hole that a given student's stuck in? Saying I can't. Peer pressure. Tattletale. Achievement. It can definitely be a hole. Fearful. Okay.
Relationships.
Yeah. What is it with the two guys on either side? Relationships. I'm just teasing you. I'm totally teasing you. We'll come back to relationships as wholes. Okay, now put on your own hat. Your own hat. What are your holes? And they may be the same. I mean, relationships is definitely up there, so I was just making a joke. What are your holes? Like, and particularly I want you to think about the two big ones, holes in your classroom that you fall into and holes in your family that you fall into. And I'm going to say a few more things. So holes, there's all sorts of ways to fall into a hole. So what do people think are some of the ways? Maybe my question's not clear. So you can fall into a hole, like kind of obliviously and accidentally. You can fall into a hole knowingly and still fall in. You can be pushed, and this one, it's a little tricky, but we're going to use that terminology for now. If you're really grounded, I think it's very hard to be pushed into a hole, but sometimes we're not so grounded and we can be pushed into a hole. You can push someone else into the hole, and you can fall into the hole all by yourself with no help whatsoever. So take a moment, think about the holes in your classroom or in your life. You may have a couple that have already come to mind. And again, just as simply as possible, grouping into groups of 4, and just talk about how do you fall into holes, how do you get out of holes, what are your common holes, and we'll take about 15 minutes to have conversation in a small group, and then we'll take another 15 minutes to have conversation in the large group. So just where you are, very simply.